En la noche tenemos
Ranas. Color on their hips. It's like green and light blue.
Yeah, it's like fluorescent.
Yeah, and some think it's in the armpits as well. Oh, that's not the one I wanted. His chin's a bit dark. And then it's like they're all in their little own apartment.
Boa, Bia.
Isso. Já vai no próximo.
Hello and welcome to Middle East Now. Let's take a look at today's headlines. Hezbollah launches a rocket at Tel Aviv for the first time in history amid a major escalation with Israel. And the King of Jordan slams Israel at the UN General Assembly. We'll discuss what this means for the future of Israeli-Jordanian relations. Plus, Iran is in the headlines for meddling with international affairs, from assassinating Trump to instigating terror in Sweden. We have the scoop. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us. It is day 355 of the Israel-Hamas war, but the focus is now on the escalating fighting between Israel and Hezbollah. 2 people were injured in a Hezbollah rocket strike on northern Israel today, just hours after Hezbollah launched a ballistic missile at Tel Aviv for the first time ever. Meanwhile, the IDF has announced the call-up of 2 reserve brigades ahead of a possible ground incursion. And this as Iran's supreme leader says that the latest Israeli blows will not break their strongest proxy. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran has more.
A ballistic missile launched from Lebanon, setting off sirens in Tel Aviv early Wednesday. The Hezbollah missile was intercepted mid-air in the first time ever the Lebanese terror group fired at Israel's main metropolis. Hezbollah claimed it targeted the Mossad headquarters, following a series of exploding devices and assassinations of senior commanders. The residents of Tel Aviv got a taste of the daily reality in northern Israel since October, whereas in the north, dozens of rockets, as well as numerous drones, were launched at Israeli towns and army bases. 2 people were injured from a rocket impact in Kibbutz Sa'ar near Nahariya.
We arrived on the scene and saw extensive damage. We found 2 injuries, one 35-year-old man in severe condition and a 52-year-old man in moderate condition. They were both taken to the hospital in Nahariya.
Throughout the day, Israel continued its airstrikes on hundreds of Hezbollah targets across Lebanon, including hitting the launcher that fired the missile at Tel Aviv. The IDF says the latest blows have shaken the strongest of Iran's proxies as it announced a call-up of 2 reserve brigades to be deployed to Israel's north.
You hear the jets overhead. We have been striking all day. This is both to prepare the ground for your possible entry and to continue degrading Hezbollah. Today, Hezbollah expanded its range of fire, and later today, they will receive a very strong response. Prepare yourselves.
A Hezbollah official told Reuters that last week's explosions of Hezbollah's communication devices put 1,500 fighters out of commission due to their injuries, with many left blinded or with hands blown off. While a significant blow, it represents only a fraction of Hezbollah's strength, estimated at 50 to 60,000 fighters.
They managed to kill some effective and precious members of Hezbollah. This damaged Hezbollah, no doubt, but this damage will not bring Hezbollah to its knees. Hezbollah's organizational and human structure is much too strong to be broken with such things.
Despite Israel's attempts to degrade its capabilities, Hezbollah still maintains a vast arsenal of missiles and an extensive tunnel network, which are so far helping it weather Israel's unprecedented strikes. But it and its Iranian backers will soon need to decide whether the cost has become too great and move to a wider war with Israel.
All right, let's turn to northern Israel, where our correspondent Zach Anders is joining us live. Zach, where are you? What is the latest right now?
Good evening from Safad. We're at the site of an earlier rocket impact here into a home in this essentially a retirement community. The Ministry of Housing for Israel manages the majority of the payments, helps assist some of the retirees 55 and up to be able to afford to live in this area. They helped manufacture the homes back in the day. These are older homes. No one was here at the time. The family, the couple, I'm told, was traveling abroad when the rocket came through. The IDF has confirmed to me that there were 40 different rockets fired, approximately 40, I was told, at Safad by 6 p.m. So this is the attacks throughout the day. That's another Israeli fighter jet I've heard overhead. In the last 5 minutes, I've heard at least 5 fighter jets, and at least 2 of them I could tell kicking off their afterburners, really zipping up. You could just hear the deep, deep howl of those engines, of those advanced fighter jets. And if it's anything like what we've experienced over the last 48 hours, this could be a signal of another potentially strong wave of Israeli air attacks throughout Lebanon. Now, we know that there have been some 280 Hezbollah targets that have been hit today. When we hear the IDF leadership saying that there's going to be a strong punishing response for that ballistic missile that was launched at Tel Aviv this morning, curious to know whether or not of the 280 targets that have already been hit at this point in the night, if that's the strong response, or if the strong response is still coming, potentially those fighter jets we hear heading north are participating or about to begin in another wave of aerial assaults.
All right, Zach Anders, thank you for joining us from Tzfat in northern Israel. We're going to be back with you later on in the show. I'd like to turn now to our guests in the studio. We have Colonel in the Reserves, Dr. Jacques Neria, the former deputy head of assessment of the Israeli military intelligence. And we also have the former Israeli consul in Los Angeles, Yaki Dayan.
Good evening, Natasha.
Good evening. So, you know, Israel just seems to be upping its attacks against Hezbollah targets. No signs here of really anything slowing down, with, like Zach said, even more threats to have a harsher response following that missile that was fired at Tel Aviv this morning. The question is, where is this ultimately headed? We're also hearing reports that there could be a ground incursion. What is your take?
Well, my view is that we are heading into a situation where we won't have any other choice but to enter South Lebanon on a ground offensive. And this is because, I mean, if we have in our mind the idea that Hezbollah will just wave a white flag, that he will surrender, forget about it. This is not going to happen. On the contrary, I think after living in this shock of the last 10 days, Hezbollah now has recovered, and the fact is that, I mean, first the missile force is working. They are hitting us in various places. They have expanded the scope of the attacks, and they have also managed to send a ballistic missile towards Tel Aviv, which was intercepted around Hadera, more or less. So, I mean, 40 kilometers more than in the north of Tel Aviv, which means that Hezbollah is saying to Israel very bluntly, we are not afraid of you. I mean, I don't know from where all those numbers have been published in Israel, about 50% of their rockets have been destroyed and so on. There's nothing of the sort. Hezbollah is living and kicking and
it's interesting working. Because you say this, but I think the public perception, at least in my opinion, is that Israel is performing very strongly, that Hezbollah is actually showing weakness in a certain sense. I mean, the choice this morning, for example, with the ballistic missile to fire one missile rather than a barrage of sorts was an interesting choice, right? There's a message in there.
I have a thing to say. I mean, we estimate that our assessment is that Hezbollah has about between 150 to 200,000 missiles, meaning that, I mean, according to different research, that he is capable of firing between 3,000 to 5,000 missiles a day, and in fact, he's firing only 350. Why is that? Why is that? As you say, why only one missile directed to Tel Aviv?
What is your take, Yaki?
So there are three basically scenarios. The current one is a gradual, controlled escalation. This is what is happening now on the ground. The second one is exactly what Jacques just mentioned, the ground invasion. And the third one is all hell break loose, meaning bombing Beirut, bombing the infrastructure, bombing everything. Not just a ground invasion to the southern part, but whole hell break loose. Now, there is no big appetite for this scenario, nor by the Israelis, not by the Iranians, and definitely not by the Americans and the others. So they are trying to de-escalate. The Americans are saying that they're having all kinds of deals that they are offering right now. But the question is, what exactly? Because there is an opportunity to finish everything, but everything means not going back to the Security Council resolution, which is 1701, which didn't work at all. In order to bring back, and this is the goal of the war, one of the targets of this war, to bring back the northern citizens to their homes, you need to provide them something which is stable and very something that they can rely on. So it's not just some kind of a diplomatic solution that the Americans will give guarantees like the 1701 by the Security Council that didn't work even a day. So maybe because there is not a big appetite by anyone to escalate it furthermore, you might reach some kind of an agreement, but Israel should not be satisfied with something which would last for a week or 2 weeks, some kind of a band-aid. Rather, some kind of a much more general agreement, a control agreement, and something that if it doesn't work, then Israel can hit right away, again, with the legitimacy of the international community.
Right.
Well,
I mean, the question is...
1701 didn't work because Israel didn't apply it. Israel was just negative. I mean, from the first week, we saw that Hezbollah was coming back to South Lebanon, and we did nothing. We just let the beast, we fed the beast, and we got a monster.
100%.
Right, so the answer now is how Israel is going to react.
Exactly so.
If we are going to be seeing violations of any type of agreement on the ground. But on this note, I'd like to turn to our next guest. Stick with us. I want to hear your input on the conversation that we're about to have here. But the Israeli parliament has now approved a bill increasing the 2024 state budget by over $920 million to help fund evacuated civilians and reserve soldiers until the end of the year. It still needs to pass second and third readings in the Knesset to actually pass into law. But this comes as over 63,000 civilians from northern Israel remain evacuated with no clear picture of when they will be able to come home. And joining us now is Major in the Reserves, Avraham Levine, Media Director and Speaker at the Alma Research Center. Now, we have been hearing residents of the north cry out for help for almost a year now. They're calling on the Israeli government to take action to save their homes and saying that not enough is being done. We're now finally seeing a major escalation with Hezbollah, much heavier rocket fire into the north as a result of that, which is obviously terrifying for many northerners, some of whom actually returned home and now are being evacuated again. What are we hearing from these community members now? Do they feel that the right choices are being made?
I think many people here in the north are happy that Israel is changing course. So it's very hard to say exactly what will happen and what will be the results. But I think many people are satisfied that something is changing at last. Are we concerned with the change? No, I think many people are actually happy that this is happening already, because we've been waiting for 11 months. Strategy not working. Nothing changed. We've been attacking Hezbollah. They've been attacking us. Israel has been attacking military Hezbollah targets. Hezbollah has been attacking evacuated and non-evacuated areas, and nothing changed. So here, something's changing. And I think many, many people would say we're happy to have our kids at home and wait in shelters if this will bring the solution that we're waiting for.
Now, even if Hezbollah is pushed back from the north, will residents truly be willing to return to the north of Israel? And what will that process look like given the mass damage that we're seeing?
Well, first of all, we started seeing a similar system working in the south. Many communities came back. So we're seeing that it can work. Will everybody come back? I don't think so. Many people are traumatized and maybe will have a difficult time bringing their kids back home to a place they were threatened, and they're waiting to see the situation is really different. The threat is removed. Hezbollah eliminated from the area in a clear way. On the other hand, I think in Israel, we have to stop talking about the periphery, the Galilee, the area around Gaza, the Golan Heights where I live, as periphery, and start talking about it as a front. This will not be a peaceful area forever, and we have to be prepared to keep on fighting and being in the front lines, facing our enemies. And I think that's something that everybody can live with and should be aware of when they decide to live here.
Now, which areas of the north at this point are the most at risk, given the uptick in rocket fire that we're seeing from Lebanon? Obviously, we know that the community is really on the border, like Kibbutz Manara, for example, have been heavily impacted. But now we're seeing kind of a Hezbollah focus, per se, on areas near Haifa.
Hezbollah is looking for a more high target, high-value targets in the north, like Tzfat, like Haifa and the Krayot around there. I don't think there's someone that's more at risk. The sirens work, the shelters work. Hezbollah's attacks are not working in terms of hitting our people.
Right.
And I think we can hold on to this situation as much as the IDF needs to finish the job.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you, Abraham, for joining us from the north of Israel. We are going to turn to a different topic now, Syria. While hostilities ratchet up between Israel and Hezbollah, the nearby Syria front has remained relatively quiet, but infrequent exchanges still take place from time to time. And late Tuesday night, the Syrian military says it intercepted an Israeli missile targeting the port city of Tartus, with witnesses reporting multiple explosions. Our Alex Schloss has the story.
Amid rocket fire from Hezbollah in Lebanon, and as Israeli ground forces push on to defeat Hamas in Gaza, Syria has so far remained a relatively quiet front in the last 11 months. But there are fears that this reality could change as hostilities between the IDF and Hezbollah reach new heights. Late Tuesday night, the Syrian military said it intercepted an Israeli missile targeting the port city of Tartus, with witnesses reporting multiple explosions. The IDF has yet to comment on the attack, as is the norm when Israel is alleged to carry out operations in Syrian territory. Syria is not only a major ally of Iran, but also hosts dozens of Iran-aligned proxy groups, and has served as the training ground for its Lebanese ally Hezbollah, which gained combat experience in the decade-long Syrian civil war. Even if the IDF is able to significantly downgrade Hezbollah capabilities, the organization will have little problem resupplying through its sovereign state ally of Syria, which has airports, seaports, as well as direct border crossings into Lebanon, and remains willing to assist its partner across the border. According to Israeli media reports, the IDF has been tracking around 40,000 militiamen who have traveled to Syria from across the region and are awaiting Hezbollah's call to arms in the case of a full-blown war with Israel. Though not elite fighters, the sheer number of men could pose a real threat to Israel's northern communities, already living under near daily rocket fire. Though it appears the Assad regime in Syria is so far unwilling to be drawn into a regional war while it battles for full control of Syria, it remains unclear if groups in the country that answer first to its patrons in Tehran share the same reluctance.
Turning back now to our guests in the studio. So I think the first question that, is on most people's mind is, what threat does Syria ultimately pose to Israel, and how seriously is Israel taking that threat?
Well, considering the state of Syria today, I think that the real threat from the Syrian army towards Israel is almost null, not inexistent. But Syria is, in fact, the springboard that allows the transfer of weapons and equipment and personnel from Iran, Iraq towards Lebanon, and this is the main issue that we are talking about. Because otherwise, if you look at Syria, Syria is divided in the north under Turkish occupation, in the east Kurdish the semi-autonomous area under the American protection, the south under Russian protection, and then you have the militias, the Iranian militias, the Afghanis, the Pakistanis, the Iraqis, and all sort of it. The thing is that Syria, if there's something that one must remember, is that in 1982, Iran sent an expeditionary force to Lebanon. It was stopped at the time by Hafiz Assad. Hafiz Assad gave them a tourist tour in Syria for 10 days, and they understood they will not cross into Lebanon. Now Bashar Assad depends on Iran. It's not Hafiz Assad. It's not the Assad the father. It's Assad the son. Mm-hmm. And if Iran will send an expeditionary force, it will go through the Syria inside Lebanon. And this is the main issue that we have to take care. I mean, to confront, as much as the different installations where the Syrians are producing weapons. I mean, precise weapons for Hezbollah.
So I would like to continue, Jacques, and say that Syria doesn't stand alone here. You connect Syria to what is going on in Iraq, what is going on in Lebanon, what is going on in Yemen. The world, and especially the United States, understands a bit more why Iran is posing such a huge threat. It's not because of their nuclear military program. It's not because of the threat to Israel. It's because of mainly two reasons. One, they see how they destabilize countries, one after the other in the region. And they are actively dealing with those countries one by one. And the second thing is how they are arming those countries. I mean, it's not, when you see a 2,000 kilometers missile by the Houthis, it's not all of a sudden the Houthis have a wonderful military industry that they are producing such advanced missiles. It's because the Iranians are supplying those missiles. So there is an understanding. And when you are countering Syria, you are basically countering the Iranian involvement within Syria.
All right. Well, we are going to turn now to Jordan because it's actually an interesting segue. The foreign ministers of Egypt, Iraq, and Jordan have issued a rare joint statement to condemn Israel's so-called aggression against Lebanon. The three countries claim that Israel is pushing the region towards an all-out war. And interestingly, they made no such statement following Hezbollah's near-daily rocket fire on northern Israel, which began on October 8th, just a day after Hamas infiltrated and attacked southern Israel. That rocket fire has, of course, continued now for almost a year, but both Egypt and Jordan, which have peace treaties with Israel, chose not to issue any public statement on the matter. Well, joining us now is Natalie Ekanau, a research analyst at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Now, Iraq being part of this statement is one thing, but Egypt and Jordan, these are supposedly allies of the State of Israel, and they've said absolutely nothing about Hezbollah's near-daily rocket fire on Israel since October 8th, yet they choose to speak only when Israel begins to defend itself. So what is going on here?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. You asked what's going on here. As you mentioned, Jordan and Egypt both share a peace with Israel. However, that peace has grown cold in recent years. It never really permeated throughout Egyptian and Jordanian societies for a variety of reasons. The Egyptian government, while allowing high-level cooperation with the Israeli government, hasn't really allowed for its people to meet Israeli people in any meaningful way, and those people-to-people contacts matter. In the case of Jordan, the country has a substantial Palestinian population that is more or less hostile towards Israel, and that sentiment trickles up through the Jordanian government, and the rhetoric coming out of Amman reflects the sentiments of the domestic base. Jordanian officials have continued to blame Israel for the war in Gaza and its conduct towards Palestinians for the past 11 months. So this recent condemnation of Israeli action in Lebanon isn't really all that surprising.
Now, Jordan's King Abdullah II made some very aggressive stabs at Israel yesterday during a speech at the UN General Assembly. Here's some of what he had to say. Let's have a listen.
No country in the region benefits from escalation. We have seen that clearly in the dangerous developments in Lebanon over the past few days. This has to stop. For years, the Arab world has extended a hand to Israel through the Arab Peace Initiative, offering full recognition and normalization in exchange for peace. But consecutive Israeli governments, emboldened by years of impunity, have rejected peace and chosen confrontation instead.
Now, King Abdullah is clearly facing pressure, public pressure, like you mentioned, giving the mass anger in Jordan against Israel's ongoing war with Hamas. But how far is he willing to go to appease his public, and how far is Israel willing to take this? I mean, is there a chance that Israel could break ties with Jordan, or is this simply just a game of words?
You know, what I think is interesting is that for all of the rhetoric that comes out of Amman, Jordan actually benefits heavily from its partnership with Israel in a variety of ways. So severing ties with Israel would really be a net loss for the Hashemite kingdom. One of the main areas where Jordan and Israel cooperate is in the water and energy sector. Israel has provided Jordan with water since the 1990s. That arrangement is part of the original peace treaty. Just last month, Jordanian and Israeli officials met in Abu Dhabi to advance a water for energy deal that also includes the Emiratis, whereby Israel is set to supply Jordan with desalinated water in exchange for solar energy from an Emirati-sponsored solar farm in Jordan. Security is another arena where the Jordanians benefit from their partnership with Israel. Iran is looking to destabilize Jordan in a variety of ways, and Israel, as your viewers probably know, is at the fore of the fight against Iran. One of the ways that Iran is destabilizing Jordan is through narco trafficking. I think it's a very interesting issue that doesn't always make the headlines. Iran is behind the trade of an amphetamine-like drug called Captagon that's produced mainly in Syria and Lebanon, and it's a huge border security problem for Jordan. And the Jordanians have called out Iran explicitly for its role in the regional narco trade. And so partnering with Israel on security and fighting against Iran is in Jordan's best interest.
So ultimately, your opinion here is that we're not going to see a so-called breakup between Israel and Jordan over this rhetoric that is, you know, clearly heavily skewed against Israel that we're hearing coming out of the mouths of Jordanian leaders.
Correct. I don't think it's in Jordan or Israel's interest, for that matter, to have a cold break.
All right. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us, Natalie. Interesting to hear your insight. Any kind of last words before we go for a commercial break on this matter? Also, we didn't really talk about Egypt, which has also been heavily coming out against Israel.
Jordan knows, the king knows very well that he's the next target of Iran. And this is the main thing. And it's not the internal upheaval, the Palestinians. They are all incited by Iran. And we know that Iranian militias have tried several times to penetrate the borders of Jordan from Syria. And the Jordanian army has been deployed there and along the river, the Jordan River, in order to prevent that. And this is the main threat to the kingdom.
All right. Well, you know, obviously we're going to have to wait and see how this plays out, what kind of response we hear from Israel and all of these fiery statements from both Jordanian and Egyptian leaders. But we're going to go out for now for a quick commercial break. Do not go anywhere. We're going to be back shortly. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and this is Middle East Now.
Sale for the benefit of the victims of October 7th, 2023, supported by the Karen Hayazad. With renowned artists from all over the world on Monday, October 7th, 2024. View the complete catalog and access remote purchase orders on aspacefineart.com and Karen-Hayazad.fr.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
All right, we are back on Middle East now. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thank you for sticking with us. Well, as Iran's supposedly moderate new president, Masoud Pezeshkian, makes his first appearance on the world stage at the UN General Assembly, calling for improved relations with the West, Iran's behind-the-scenes actions have proven otherwise, with more assassination plots and destabilizing activities uncovered in recent days. Our Alex Schloss has the details.
Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian has made his United Nations debut with a speech calling for dialogue with the West, showing his moderate face to the world. But behind the scenes, where the real power lies in Tehran, tells another story. Former U.S. President Donald Trump was briefed by U.S. intelligence officials on credible Iranian threats to assassinate him, according to his campaign team.
Big threats on my life by Iran. The entire U.S. military is watching and waiting. Moves were already made by Iran that didn't work out, but they will try again. Not a good situation for anyone. I am surrounded by more men, guns, and weapons than I have ever seen before. Thank you to Congress for unanimously approving far more money to Secret Service. 0 no votes, strictly bipartisan. Nice to see Republicans and Democrats get together on something. An attack on a former president is a death wish for the attacker.
It wouldn't be the first such plot exposed in recent times. Just 6 weeks ago, the U.S. Justice Department charged a Pakistani national in an Iranian plot to kill a U.S. government official, potentially in response to the Trump administration's 2020 assassination of IRGC General Qasem Soleimani. The U.S. is not the only Western country to face Iranian threats. On Tuesday, Swedish authorities accused Iran of hacking into a text messaging service last year, urging Swedes to take revenge following a string of Quran-burning demonstrations.
The fact that a state actor, in this case Iran, is behind an action aimed at destabilizing Sweden or increasing polarization in our country is, of course, very serious.
Iran has denied the allegation. So as Iran's president presents a softer image of the Islamic Republic to the world, the covert actions of Tehran say otherwise.
Well, joining us now is international security analyst Shukriya Bradost. Now, we see that Iran is trying to put its claws in the world order. How do they go about doing this?
When we saw Pezeshkian's speech in New York and the way he talked to the media, it shows what we have been seeing. The reason they elected this president to send him to Western country, to the New York, and to talk to these Americans and other EU members to, I think, to prepare the situation to have a diplomatic arrangement for new dialogue between Iran and the US. That was the first time when we hear this mystery killing of the Raisi in Tehran, then the early elections and the reformist phase. We know this reformist hardliner is not real political fraction in Iran, but this reformist phase, as Pezeshkian was telling us, that in the near future we will see Iranians showing different face to the Western countries, most importantly to the US, that we are ready to have a negotiation returning to the JCPOA, this nuclear deal that they had, and the US withdraw from that deal. And what we have seen from Pezeshkian's speech, which angered many of the hardliner inside of Iran, the way he talked, the way he said, if Israel put down their guns, we are ready to do that. Or when he said, if a terrorist, doesn't matter, is Iran or Israel or America. So it was new for the global audience to hear that kind of the rhetoric from the Iranian president. That tells us the situation that regime has right now, that Israel bombarding the Hezbollah's bases. It tells us Iran doesn't have that much power or that much alternatives to attack back and or defending the Hezbollah, which has a different message, not just for Hezbollah, for the all Iran-backed militia group in the region. I do believe that in the short term is causing Hezbollah to losing power, the way Israel attacking Hezbollah, and the long term is causing Iran to lose its support from these militia groups that from the beginning of the fight, Islamic regime is starting advocating for that. That's the only regime, or the only Iran is the only countries that's supporting the Palestinian cause in the region, and in contrast to the other Arab Gulf countries in the region. So that tells us how this war is going to impact the Iranian regime inside and outside of the country.
I mean, what is the ultimate end goal here at this point? Obviously, all these different types of attacks, Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump being briefed on alleged threats from Iran to assassinate him. And then, of course, we have Swedish authorities saying that Iran is sending out mass text messages calling for revenge over the burning of a Quran in 2023. Ultimately, what is the end goal?
You know, this all reports tells the European and America that the way they deal with the Islamic regime in Iran was that Iran is the only security problem for the Middle Eastern countries, for Israel, for the Saudi, for the other country in the region. It's not that it doesn't have that long hand to reach to the US and European countries. And now what we see in this report shows that these countries know what happened in the Middle East is not to stay in the Middle East forever. The now Islamic regime has its wings in the US trying to attack or assassinate the U.S. president candidate or former president, or that in the Europe you can see Europeans are facing the terrorist attack from the Islamic regime against their own Jewish citizen, not just Iranian and opposition groups. So previously, what we had, the European country tried to deal with the Islamic regime when they assassinate the opposition leaders like Qassemlu in Europe, but the European country tried to hide this problem. So, you know, we're trying to deal with Iran is a diplomatic channel. We don't want to have a cutting diplomatic relation. But right now they see, no, that's a different phase of the problem that they are facing, because now not just Islamic regime attacking their citizen or their presidents, they even supporting Russia for the war in Europe's border. That's mean as G7's meetings, the statement mentioned that clearly. If Iran's continue to sending the missiles to Russia, is attacking the U.S. security. So now what we're seeing that Iran is a threat to international security.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us. Very much interesting to hear your input. I'd like to turn now to our guests in the studio. You know, when we're talking about a war between Israel and Hezbollah, we have seen that Hezbollah is truly one of the biggest allies, the biggest proxy groups for Iran. But do you think that Iran is really willing to risk the sacrifice and go to war with Hezbollah at this point?
The Iranians are willing to fight till the last drop of blood of the Lebanese and the Palestinians and all of the others. The whole Iranian doctrine is to push away the war from its borders. This is the conclusion that they reached after the war with Iraq, and this is exactly what they are doing. They are trying through their proxies to have wars in different borders with other soldiers, as long as it's not with the Iranians, and we see that happening now. Having said that, the Iranians are so active in trying to reach the nuclear bomb. And now in a different episode with the Russians after helping them in the Ukraine war. As we saw, they are meddling in the American elections. They are working in all those countries in the Middle East, from Iraq to Lebanon. And Bahrain is afraid, and Saudi Arabia is afraid. So this is really the most destabilizing factor, not only in the region, as your guest said, but in the world. And as long as the Americans are not willing to move from defense, from their defensive mode into their offensive mode, nothing will change. And they put in the facade a very moderate, as if moderate president, which is trying to hide this whole Iranian strategy. And as long as the Americans will not deal with that, only they will try to reach some kind of negotiations and deals with the Iranians will make progress from Lebanon to Saudi Arabia to Bahrain and to many other countries.
All right, we are going to turn now to the United Kingdom. It looks like the UK is moving troops to Cyprus to help its citizens evacuate Lebanon as the fighting escalates between Israel and Hezbollah. The British government says that at least 700 troops will travel to Cyprus to bolster their presence in the region. And joining us now is British journalist and Middle East expert Tom Gross on the matter. Tom, how many British citizens are there currently in Lebanon, and what directions are they being given by the British government at this point?
Well, the estimate is there are about 10,000 British citizens in Lebanon, but of course there are quite a lot of dual nationals and they may not know the exact numbers. The British government's actually been urging all British citizens to leave Lebanon already since August, when there was an increased tension between Israel and Lebanon in the summer. And at that time, there were more commercial flights out of Lebanon. Now, almost every airline, including British Airways, every commercial airline has stopped flying, only the Lebanese national carrier. So I can only presume that they are sending warships also to try to attempt to send a boat or something to Lebanon and evacuate citizens who cannot get commercial flights out should they wish to leave.
Are we seeing the UK warn its citizens in Israel to leave?
Not to my knowledge, no. I mean, there are constantly travel warnings about Israel and many parts of the world, no doubt related to Gaza and the West Bank and so on, but I haven't seen any widespread call to leave. I think that probably the British government has confidence in the Israeli missile defense systems, the Iron Dome and so on, to protect most British citizens in Israel. Although I should point out a number of British citizens were murdered by Hamas on October 7th. And some were taken hostage, and there are a couple among the hostages in Gaza who are British-Israeli dual nationals still.
So what kind of role can we expect the UK to play if a larger-scale war does break out between Israel and Hezbollah? What rhetoric are we hearing from the British government?
Well, actually, Britain sent a number of troops about 3 months ago to Lebanon to help train the official Lebanese army, although it's not quite clear what good that's doing because the Lebanese army seems kind of impotent. There are also some British military force on the other side of Lebanon with kind of watchtowers to stop infiltration by Islamic State gunmen from the eastern side into Lebanon. And Britain has suggested setting up similar watchtowers on the border with Israel, of a kind they once had in Northern Ireland, to try to stop cross-border infiltration, I guess, into Israel by Hezbollah militia. But I mean, I don't, to be honest, what I think will be best for Britain, since Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, is currently in New York at the United Nations General Assembly, is to make strong words to Iran, to tell Hezbollah to stop firing missiles at Israel, and there would be a ceasefire in Lebanon immediately if Hezbollah announced that they were going to step back from the border. And it is beyond me why Western governments aren't putting more pressure on Iran. It's just a lot of defensive actions to try and run away. It's a bit like what happened in Afghanistan. There are about 15,000 British citizens in Afghanistan, and it was chaos when they tried to get out there, and various people couldn't get out. So the obvious solution is to pressure Iran to tell Hezbollah, which it fully controls, to stop firing weapons. And I don't know why that isn't in the discourse, well, at least publicly in the discourse of the British, French, and other Western countries.
All right, Tom Gross joining us from the UK. Thank you for that update and that insight. I'd like to turn back to our guest in the studio. Jack, you're about to leave us, so I want to ask you for some kind of final words here, especially in response to what Tom just had to say. He's saying that Western countries need to be putting the pressure on Iran. But at this point, do you think that if Iran were to send that message to Hezbollah, stop firing rockets, it would make an impact?
Well, I think that the West, and certainly not the US, are not interested in putting pressure on Iran. I mean, it's a fact. We saw lots of Iranian provocations against American troops, against American presence in the Indian Ocean and other places, and the United States preferred just to ignore that and just try to appease Iran. So this is where we stand. I mean, we saw that during the last year how the U.S. administration was running in order to mend the fences with Iran. I mean, it was surprised by the fact that Iran was against the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and at every junction, Iran just torpedoed all the American initiatives, and Washington just accepted it as a fact.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jack. We're going to be saying goodbye to you right now, but we are not done here on Middle East Now. We're turning to New York City. Fears of an escalation in the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah are reaching the center stage of the international community, with many now looking for a diplomatic solution. And we have more in this report by Fabio Shapiro.
As Israel's war against Hamas nears its first anniversary and the situation heats up on Israel's northern border, the United Nations is convening once again for the annual General Assembly meeting. Following the Israeli strikes that killed many Hezbollah senior officers, calls for de-escalation echoed in the hall.
These strikes conducted on both sides of the Blue Line, and in the region more broadly, must end. France once again calls on the parties and those that support them to de-escalate and avoid a regional conflict that would be devastating for everyone, first and foremost, the civilian population.
Escalation is extremely dangerous and worrying. I can say that we are almost in a full-fledged war.
Gaza is a non-stop nightmare that threatens to take the entire region with it. Look no further than Lebanon. We should all be alarmed by the escalation. Lebanon is at the brink. The people of Lebanon, the people of Israel, and the people of the world cannot afford Lebanon to become another Gaza.
Understanding the situation they are in internally, Lebanon refrained from naming Hezbollah, which is dominant in the country, and focus on the issues faced by Lebanese society.
Prime Minister Najib Mikati is working with the government and government teams to deal with the aggression that we are victim to at all levels: diplomatic, humanitarian, health, security, and also in terms of people's livelihoods.
On the sidelines, Lebanese Foreign Minister Abdallah Abul Habib met his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi. Since last year, China has become an important diplomatic player in the Middle East, a position Beijing intends to expand as the Western grip loosens. Yet, U.S. President Joe Biden was hopeful his work in the region would be fruitful.
Hezbollah, unprovoked, during the October 7th attack, launching rockets into Israel. Almost a year later, too many on each side of the Israeli-Lebanon border remain displaced. Full-scale war is not in anyone's interest. Even if the situation has escalated, a diplomatic solution is still possible. In fact, it remains the only path to lasting security to allow the residents from both countries to return to their homes and the border safely. And that's what we're working tirelessly to achieve.
Outside the hall, Israel ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, digressed about a possible ground invasion.
We had experience in Lebanon in the past. We are not eager to start any ground invasion anywhere. I don't want to send my son, and we don't want to send our boys to fight in a foreign country. But we are determined to protect the civilians of Israel. We prefer a diplomatic solution. If it's not working, we are using other methods to show to the other side that we mean business.
Joining us now is our U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. Mike, the UN Security Council is holding an emergency meeting on the fighting in Lebanon tonight. What do we know about that at this point?
Well, we understand that the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is set to brief those in attendance at the Council tonight. When the UN Secretary General appears, it usually indicates it's a high priority, not only for the UN, but for the members of the Security Council. France called for the meeting. France is the pen holder on the issue. In UN terms, it means they're the one that leads the way on a particular issue, this time with Lebanon because of France's historical ties to the country. But what it means in actual practice, it actually means very little. A, because this is the UN and nothing really gets done here to begin with, but B, because of all the varied and divergent interest among the council members and the intractability right now of the fighting between Israel and Lebanon. We heard earlier reports that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu told American officials that he's open to some kind of agreement that will allow the return of residents of Israel's north back to their homes, but that is wide open to interpretation and wide open to concessions from Lebanon and Hezbollah or lack thereof. So we're only at a starting point now rather than something actionable that might actually come out of tonight's meeting. Don't really expect much other than talk, which is the general MO here at the UN.
What other standout comments have we heard today from world leaders on the situation in the Middle East?
A lot of the focus was on Vladimir Zelensky's speech today, and it was notable, although he didn't discuss the Middle East per se, obviously his own country's problems taking precedent right now, but he said, look right now at who's Russia's friends are. He mentioned North Korea, but he also mentioned Iran, and he said, well, take a look at who their friends are. That should tell you about the situation. He also needled China and Brazil for getting involved. He said it's to burnish their own foreign policy credentials rather than to actually bring about a solution to the problem here. We really haven't heard much today simply because a lot of the global leaders that were on the speaking schedule today are from other parts of the world. They're not really intimately involved in the Middle East per se. It was, though, interesting just a few moments ago, and your previous guest mentioned Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, and trying to get him involved in this particular conflict in a positive way. He took Russia to task. Remember, Russia has been an instigator and an antagonist to Israel throughout this war. He took Russia to task, telling them to their faces in a meeting, Russia shouldn't even show their faces in this building. So it's clear right now where everybody's alignments are, but in terms of actually coming to some sort of resolution on the Israel-Hezbollah front right now, again, a long ways away, and it's not going to be done here at the UN. It'll be done between the counterparts and likely a small group of mediators and negotiators far, far away from this building here in New York.
All right, Mike Wagenheim joining us from New York City with that update. Thank you so much. We're going to turn back to our guest in the studio, Yaki Dayan. Yaki, what we haven't really spoken about right now is the United States and its role in the fighting, per se. What kind of action we can expect from the Biden administration, given the fact that we know there are elections that are quickly approaching right now. I mean, this is clearly not the best time for the current administration to see a wide-scale conflict break out between Israel, Hezbollah, and the broader region. So what's your take on the kind of involvement we are going to see from the U.S.?
Absolutely, Natasha. Just one word about the UN. I mean, it became such an irrelevant organization, and Antonio Guterres is really heading this organization into, I don't know what, because the last concrete decision that was taken there. I don't remember when it was. And if the decision about the recreation of the state of Israel would have been brought now to the UN, I'm not sure that they would have supported the reestablishment of the state of Israel. Having said that, the US basically, yes, the elections, November 5th, this is what interests now the Americans. They don't want to see an overall war. They want to prevent it as much as possible. There is a lot of pressure being put now on Israel not to escalate furthermore the war with Hezbollah. They are trying to present some kind of a deal that would include Gaza and Lebanon together. I would say that in an overall overview about the Biden policy although his tremendous support for Israel, I would say that there is one thing that was lacking all the time in his policy, and this is the offense. The American administration was building coalition, as he mentioned in his speech at the UN. They were creating deterrence. They were playing defense remarkably well, but they were lacking offense. And the superpower lacking offense, eventually at the end of the day, they don't have enough leverages, not in Europe where Russia, Ukraine is, not in Asia where China wants to attack Taiwan, and definitely not in the Middle East where Iran is meddling with all those forces. So, the Americans want to make sure that they have industrial quiet till November 5th, but as long as they are not willing to use offense and just negotiation, that would be very hard to achieve.
All right, Yaki, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us in the studio. Before we end the show, let's turn back to northern Israel, where our correspondent Zach Anders joins us live. Zach, any new updates, any new barrages of rocket fire from Hezbollah?
No latest Hezbollah attacks. However, as I had mentioned before, we were hearing the Israeli fighter jets overhead. I still hear one. It appears heading north, and I can't necessarily tell north or south, especially without being able to see the plane in the dark sky. But when you can hear the afterburners kick in and you know that it's picking up speed, in my experience, I believe that means they're heading north to perform targeted attacks inside Lebanon. And as we have been following and monitoring some of these Lebanese channels, we are now seeing additional air attacks about 10 miles north of the border, still in southern Lebanon on the same parallel as Tyre. So we are seeing continued Israeli air attacks into this area. There's been some additional developments as we've been watching really closely, and I know you guys have been discussing the potential for a ground incursion into Lebanon. We are getting a few updates on our end, but nothing reportable at this time, waiting for some of those details to firm up and conclude.
All right, Zach Anders joining us from the north of Israel. Thank you for that update. We are done right now on Middle East Now, but don't worry, we are going to be back live with the rundown shortly. I'm Natasha Kirchuk. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Sale for the benefit of the victims of October 7th, 2023, supported by the Karen Hayazad. With renowned artists from all over the world on Monday, October 7th, 2024. View the complete catalog and access remote purchase orders on aspacefineart.com and Karen-Hayazad.fr.
Made Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today. Welcome to the Rundown on I-24 News. I'm Caleb Ben-David. Hezbollah's rocket attacks on Israel reached their furthest point south today when air raid sirens rang out across Tel Aviv, and a ballistic missile launched from Lebanon was intercepted by the David Sling air defense system. But the harsher blow came from a strike in northern Israel that injured 2 people, one seriously. Meanwhile, the IDF announced the call-up of 2 reserve brigades as the chief of staff warns that a ground incursion may be on its way, and Prime Minister Netanyahu pledges to return displaced residents of the north back to their homes. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran has more.
A ballistic missile launched from Lebanon, setting off sirens in Tel Aviv early Wednesday. The Hezbollah missile was intercepted midair in the first time ever the Lebanese terror group fired at Israel's main metropolis. Hezbollah claimed it targeted the Mossad headquarters, following a series of exploding devices and assassinations of senior commanders. The residents of Tel Aviv got a taste of the daily reality in northern Israel since October. Whereas in the north, dozens of rockets, as well as numerous drones, were launched at Israeli towns and army bases. 2 people were injured from a rocket impact in Kibbutz Sa'ar near Nahariya.
We arrived on the scene and saw extensive damage. We found 2 injuries, one 35-year-old man in severe condition and a 52-year-old man in moderate condition. They were both taken to the hospital in Nahariya.
Throughout the day, Israel continued its airstrikes on hundreds of Hezbollah targets across Lebanon, including hitting the launcher that fired the missile at Tel Aviv.
I cannot elaborate on everything we are doing, but I can tell you one thing. We are determined to return the residents of the north safely to their homes. We are inflicting unimaginable blows on Hezbollah. We are doing it with force and with guile. I promise you one thing, we will not rest until the residents return home.
The IDF says the latest blows have shaken the strongest of Iran's proxies as it announced a call-up of 2 reserve brigades to be deployed to Israel's north.
You hear the jets overhead. We have been striking all day. This is both to prepare the ground for your possible entry and to continue degrading Hezbollah. Today, Hezbollah expanded its range of fire, and later today, they will receive a very strong response. Prepare yourselves.
A Hezbollah official told Reuters that last week's explosions of Hezbollah's communication devices put 1,500 fighters out of commission due to their injuries, with many left blinded or with hands blown off. While a significant blow, it represents only a fraction of Hezbollah's strength, estimated at 50 to 60,000 fighters.
They managed to kill some effective and precious members of Hezbollah. This damaged Hezbollah, no doubt, but this damage will not bring Hezbollah to its knees. Hezbollah's organizational and human structure is much too strong to be broken with such things.
Despite Israel's attempts to degrade its capabilities, Hezbollah still maintains a vast arsenal of missiles and an extensive tunnel network, which are so far helping it weather Israel's unprecedented strikes. But it and its Iranian backers will soon need to decide whether the cost has become too great and move to a wider war with Israel.
And joining us in studio for more is Reserves IDF Lieutenant Colonel Doron Avital, former commander of Special Forces, and our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran. Doron, a troop buildup on the border. We heard the chief of staff there. Ground invasion imminent. What would be the timetable for such a thing?
I'm not sure it's imminent. I mean, we prepare the forces. Also, ground incursion can have many forms. You don't have just to... An idea to take the whole buffer zone of southern Lebanon would require more forces. That can be an incursion to a certain village that threaten one of our villages, settling them for a few days, trying to dismantle infrastructure of tunnels and weapon ricochet, all sorts of options. I think the IDF works right now very smartly. I mean, it's not even the Air Force strikes and the ground troops operation would be, I think, measured in a sense. That's my feeling.
All right, and Ariel, one rocket towards Tel Aviv. First time Hezbollah has tried to reach this far. Obviously, they have more. Was this a message, an experiment? How would you characterize what happened in Tel Aviv this morning?
Yeah, definitely. By launching a ballistic missile at Tel Aviv, they could have launched more. They have thousands, but they chose to launch one. I would imagine sending a message. I'm not quite sure what that message is because I think Israel's message of these past few days is a lot stronger. Israel's attacking Hezbollah at a warlike rate, whereas Hezbollah is continuing in its slow pace attrition strikes. And so as long as there's that discrepancy, Israel has the advantage, and Israel's continuing trying to exact as many achievements as possible, continuing to degrade Hezbollah capabilities until Hezbollah makes a decision. Either once they realize that it's not cost effective enough to maintain this current pace of attrition, they either have to pick up the pace to all-out war or go to a diplomatic agreement. Now, they're in that crossroads right now, according to, just simply based on their actions on the ground, it does not appear like they have made a decision yet. But there is reporting coming out also from Arab media, also from Reuters, indicating that the Lebanese government has finally woken up and is really trying to pick up the pace regarding diplomatic efforts. Nabi Berri, the pro-Hezbollah Speaker of Parliament, said the next 24 hours are critical regarding reaching an agreement. And Reuters reporting that the Americans are trying to aim for a ceasefire that could couple a ceasefire also in Gaza. So interesting diplomatic developments, but at the end of the day, Hezbollah, a terror organization that takes its orders from Iran, is going to have to make the decision to agree to that or not.
Ceasefire in Lebanon, I can't see it coupling with Gaza. There's no reason.
No, I'm not sure, but also the Iranian leader, the tone was a little bit moderate. Have you heard Khamenei?
Well, we're going to discuss that a little later in the program. Let's go to our Zach Anders, who's up there in northern Israel near the Lebanon border. And Zach, I see you looking towards the sky there with good reason, because we saw a lot of fire in the north, and unfortunately, in this case, at least one Israeli citizen seriously injured.
Yeah, that's right. We're here in Safad, where the IDF tells me today some 40 rockets were launched in and around the city. Again, an important strategic area. This is IDF Northern Command, located not far from where I'm standing. This home received the brunt of the damage here, the most damage in today's rocket attacks. Fortunately, the couple that lives here was not home at the time. I'm told that they were abroad. but you can see in the cement wall behind me the actual point of entry for the projectile, and then the roof explodes outwards from there. So this is reinforced concrete. Imagine the force that it takes to be able to puncture. This is an older home. Actually, Israel's Minister of Housing was here earlier in the afternoon surveying. He spoke a bit about how this housing development was part of an earlier push. This predates the Israeli code for having a mamad, a shelter in each home, but the homes that were built here by the government do have that reinforced concrete, thicker walls, but as you can see, the roof still made of wood and tile. As where things stand right now, the IDF telling me 280 plus Hezbollah targets hit today, including 60 intelligence sites. We've been hearing a considerable pickup of noise in the last hour from Israeli fighter jets. Originally, I hesitated to report any of that information, given that I couldn't locate the jets in the sky and be able to see whether or not they were moving north or south. They could be returning, of course. And we continue to hear the jets now. I actually was able then to see 2 jets with their afterburners. So the jets themselves did not have any of their navigation lights on, but I could see the afterburners, the glow from that fire, and they were heading north. We then looked at our compass and were able to pick 70 degrees northeast. So if you took that line that the jet was flying directly overhead and continued it, that would be into the Bekaa Valley, which in the last 30 minutes, we've been getting reports that there have been airstrikes in the south of Lebanon, in the Mahroun area. So not yet any firm reports of any airstrikes in the Bekaa Valley, but I'd be interested to see in the next 15, 20 minutes whether or not we do get any information out of Lebanese channels, as again, the jets are just rapidly overhead, whether or not we will see any activity there. Again, that's just observations from what we're seeing here, not necessarily going to end up being some sort of end result. We also have an update from Lebanon's interim minister of health. He says 51 dead today, 223 wounded throughout today's airstrikes. What is missing from this minister's statement today? The number of women and children, which the previous days they did include that breakdown of women and children dead today. For some reason that we, right now, we don't know why that was not included, potentially that there were none, but given the ferocity of the last 2 days of airstrikes, there has been intensive collateral damage throughout. So something to, of course, we will continue to keep our eyes on as the jets continue to fly overhead. But the last Hezbollah attack, Kalev, now more than 2 hours old.
All right. Well, as we know, the IDF spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, will speak this evening. We'll see if there's any change, for example, at Home Front Command instructions following the attacks this morning. As I said before, one Israeli from that attack on Kibbutz Sar seriously injured. Zach, stay near a shelter, please, and take shelter when needed. Now, as we noted, air raid sirens rang out this morning across Tel Aviv, announcing the arrival of the first rocket fired by Hezbollah to ever reach Israel's largest urban area. It was, you might say, a wake-up call for the residents of this city, both literally and figuratively. Samantha Trank has more on that.
At 6:30 Wednesday morning, residents and tourists in Tel Aviv were woken up by the wail of air raid sirens after Hezbollah launched a surface-to-surface missile towards the city, the first time for a projectile fired from Lebanon to target central Israel.
I'm angry that I got woken up at 6:30 by a rocket attack from Lebanon, but I also feel for the Israelis who live with this day in, day out. We say over 8,000 rockets since October the 8th, and that children get woken up. And I was thinking at this time people go to work and they're at risk for their lives, and also the fear and the terror that families must feel, children must feel, that their lives are threatened. And I feel that Israeli citizens, and particularly the government, have a right to defend.
With no reports of injuries or damages, the IDF said it intercepted the Qader-1 ballistic missile using the David Sling defense system. About an hour later, the military confirmed it had struck the launcher Hezbollah used to fire the missile in southern Lebanon's Nafahia.
We arrived on Sunday, and we were just sleeping in our bed, and we heard the siren and woke us up. She woke me up, and we just ran to the stairs because they don't have shelter in the hotel. So we had to run to the stairs and just harbored there for 10 minutes and just went back to the room.
The terror group intended to target the Mossad headquarters, Israel's intelligence agency, which it holds responsible for the recent targeted killings of its commanders and an attack which caused pagers and walkie-talkies to explode, killing dozens and wounding thousands of its members.
Yeah, we happened to vacation here on a hotel on the beach.
Where from?
From another city in Israel, taking a vacation. And it surprised us, but it's not the first time at 6:30 in the morning that we're being surprised. So I can't say we were too hysterical. We went into a safe zone in the hotel. And here we are walking again, and the city is back to life, as do Israelis, really, in every place and in every city in this country. We just bounce back.
The attack on Tel Aviv comes amid many days of intensive cross-border violence in the north, including 40 rockets aimed Wednesday at Tzfat by the Lebanese terror group. No missiles fired by Hezbollah have reached as far south as Tel Aviv during the latest escalation since October 7th, nor throughout the 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah, until today.
Doron, some Tel Avivians had their late morning sleep disturbed. There was a big concert that was scheduled here for the weekend. They didn't go on. That was canceled, impacting. But how worried, concerned do Tel Avivians really need to be if, for example, as we're saying, there's a ground incursion into Lebanon, and Hezbollah really fires the breadth of its arsenal at, for example, Tel Aviv.
Yeah. First of all, I think Tel Avivians, you'll discover they have some resilience. Don't undermine the spirit of people of Tel Aviv.
People still talk about the bubble of the bubble of Tel Aviv, but that bubble's burst.
Exactly. And I think our technology, the David Sling, really operated beautifully, and I think we have a very good air defense, but of course, when you have a barrage of such rockets or missiles, then it can be hard, but this is impressive that it would intercept it. It has not reached Tel Aviv in the end, we have to admit. But yes, we have to be prepared to such an option. And as our attacks are intensifying in the north, you might see more and more Hezbollah forced by frustration or whatever cause trying to really hit Tel Aviv and show that they have capacities that until now were not that impressive, also in terms of the precision.
Right.
They didn't prove themselves as they were bragging. I mean, there's a real gap between what they have said they have in their hands and what they have shown us in the battlefield.
Right. On the other hand, one Israeli seriously injured today.
Of course, I'm not saying, but I'm saying...
We shouldn't take it lightly. Yeah. But Ariel, since you raised the issue, you talk about Lebanon sort of the government of Lebanon waking up, and Doron talked about, if you want to call it moderation comments from the Iranians. Is there a face-saving way, if you want to put it that way, for Hezbollah to back down now and agree to a diplomatic process after being holding out for 11 months on that?
It won't be only Hezbollah's decision. It will also be Iran's decision.
No, I understand, but there'll have to be some way they can spin it.
No, I know, and I think to explain what's happening over these past 48 hours, an interesting report from Lebanese MTV News, really these past few moments, that Iran informed Nasrallah that the reason for their refusal to ramp up their strikes, Hezbollah's strikes against Israel, and even Iran to join at the side of Hezbollah, is because of the UN General Assembly that's going on right now. Pezeshkian, the new Iranian president, trying to establish a first impression among world leaders, and so perhaps they are taking the more moderate tone with, at the end of the day, we know they're in a war of attrition, they're in it for the long run, and so the fact that they're not escalating more than just launching for the first time in their history a ballistic missile at Tel Aviv, only a signal. This could explain what's going on right now. But at the end of the day, Hezbollah is Iran's strongest proxy. Another one of Iran's proxies, Hamas, is being totally degraded militarily. And so I don't think Iran wants to see two of its proxies out of the picture, out of the chessboard, so to speak, at such an early stage. But again, if we're looking at Hezbollah's capabilities, Israel hasn't hurt a tenth of what Hezbollah has. We're talking about between 150 and 200,000 rockets, missiles, guided, not guided, precision, not precision, rockets and missiles. And so just the ballistic missile that we saw this morning, they have about 2,000-3,000 more of those. And so they are sending signals, but they're showing that they have time. It's up to Israel to remove that luxury of time and to continue and degrade their capabilities.
And I think there's a pressure building up within Lebanon. In the end, it's of course Hezbollah is a proxy of Iran, but it's also a Lebanese organization, and I think Israel is very clever to still strike this wedge between Lebanese infrastructure and Hezbollah targets. And we're hitting only Hezbollah targets.
Right, but we're seeing people streaming civilians from the south, from the Bekaa Valley in the east, and that is causing strain.
Of course, but no Lebanese infrastructure is being targeted, no bridges, no electrical plants.
Not yet. And most of these people who are moving...
When this will be crossed, this is a different landscape of war.
Yeah, just most of these people who are fleeing the area are Hezbollah's base.
All right. Well, speaking of displaced residents, it's now been almost a year that over 60,000 residents of northern Israel have been forced to live in internal exile, if you want to call it that, from their own homes. Now, as Hezbollah has extended their range of attack further south this week, some of those are finding themselves under fire even in their temporary refuge. Jody Notelevitz takes a look at one such case.
You feel like refugee when you stay in a hotel in a small place with the children and with this stress. It's I don't know if someone can understand it when you don't have your privacy and nothing for almost a year.
On October 7th, Oren Kakun packed a light bag and evacuated his family from their home in Shlomi, around 1 mile from the Lebanon border, fearing a similar cross-border attack would be carried out by Hezbollah in the north, like the one on southern Israel by Hamas.
It's like they took you and take your heart out of your home. Now, we need maybe to do. Yes. It's here. You will hear it now. Where is it? It's over our head. It's happened often. It's happened in the middle of the night. In the start of the morning, in 5 a.m. it's happened, and we run from the bed, and we need to get into the shelter, and a lot of stress and everything. You heard it.
Now, almost a year later, he and his 2 children are still moving from hotel to hotel, unable to return home due to the threat of Hezbollah rocket attacks, a situation which some 60,000 Israelis are currently experiencing.
My son is 21 years old, and my daughter is 15, and it's very difficult in this age for them and to me. We don't have this privacy.
The 59-year-old IT worker and his family have been sharing a bungalow in a seaside hotel just 15 kilometers, or 10 miles, away from their rocket-damaged home since April. But in recent days, some of the heaviest cross-border exchanges of fire have taken place since hostilities flared last October, Hezbollah vowing to fight until there is a ceasefire in Gaza. And with the expansion of Hezbollah rockets range, even their temporary shelter has been threatened. On Monday, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said Israel's campaign would continue until northern residents could return to their homes. The Israeli Air Force then launching more than 1,600 airstrikes on Hezbollah targets in Lebanon.
I don't see any solution except get into Lebanon. You can't trust them. You can't trust them. You can't trust the UN. You can't trust no one. We need to take care of our safety.
Though the ongoing escalation in the region worries him and his children, Oren hopes that Israel's latest operations will weaken Hezbollah enough to make the border towns safe.
I think we see a little bit light, that we attack seriously Hezbollah. We show them that we want to go back home. And this is what we see now. The strength of the IDF know that wasn't there in the 7th of October. All of us are hopefully that it will be until we get safe again. We want peace. This is what we want, to live quiet.
And we have some breaking news, an alert in the southern cities of Eilat of a suspicious aircraft in the area. Of course, Eilat has been attacked by drones from both the Houthis in Yemen and Iran-linked militias in Iraq. We'll update that as we get more information. Now, while hostilities ratchet up between Israel and Hezbollah, the nearby Syria front has remained relatively quiet. Now, infrequent exchanges still take place from time to time. Late Tuesday night, the Syrian military said it intercepted an Israeli missile targeting the port city of Tartus, with witnesses reporting multiple explosions. Alex Schloss has the story.
Amid rocket fire from Hezbollah in Lebanon, and as Israeli ground forces push on to defeat Hamas in Gaza, Syria has so far remained a relatively quiet front in the last 11 months. But there are fears that this reality could change as hostilities between the IDF and Hezbollah reach new heights. Late Tuesday night, the Syrian military said it intercepted an Israeli missile targeting the port city of Tartus, with witnesses reporting multiple explosions. The IDF has yet to comment on the attack, as is the norm when Israel is alleged to carry out operations in Syrian territory. Syria is not only a major ally of Iran, but also hosts dozens of Iran-allied proxy groups, and has served as the training ground for its Lebanese ally Hezbollah, which gained combat experience in the decade-long Syrian civil war. Even if the IDF is able to significantly downgrade Hezbollah capabilities, the organization will have little problem resupplying through its sovereign state ally of Syria, which has airports, seaports, as well as direct border crossings into Lebanon, and remains willing to assist its partner across the border. According to Israeli media reports, the IDF has been tracking around 40,000 militiamen who have traveled to Syria from across the region and are awaiting Hezbollah's call to arms in the case of a full-blown war with Israel. Though not elite fighters, the sheer number of men could pose a real threat to Israel's northern communities, already living under near daily rocket fire. Though it appears the Assad regime in Syria is so far unwilling to be drawn into a regional war while it battles for full control of Syria, it remains unclear if groups in the country that answer first to its patrons in Tehran share the same reluctance.
All right, and Ariel, what do we know about this report coming out of a lot of aerial intrusion of some kind, sirens going off there?
Yes, so still no update from the IDF. What we do know is that there were sirens for suspected infiltration of a drone, and videos coming out of the southern city of Eilat showing a strong explosion in the night skies over the southern port city. I hope we can get those visuals for you. They're just arriving right now. And as you mentioned, this would be in line with what we have seen, assistance from pro-Iranian militias in Iraq, the Houthis that have been launching drones and missiles at Israel, not at the same pace here. There's
here we go. You can see the explosion off in the distance there.
Yeah, that's the port of Eilat, and over there, that's a very strong interception. Yes. Right above the sea before it entered.
Right. Let me ask Doron about that. Definitely looked like an interception there.
Yeah, I think it's an attempt. I wouldn't hitting Eilat or hitting the port of Eilat or the Navy base, and you see it over. You see the interception over the sea. I mean, we really have a very good aerial defense mechanism that was really over those years got better and better. I wouldn't want to be in 2006. In the previous war, Lebanon trying to cope with such a threat. This is impressive.
Right.
David Sling and...
Right, I was in Haifa when I actually saw the hits there, and of course, several people lost their lives in the city of Haifa at that time.
This morning, there were sirens in the Arava desert, not the north, way down south, north of Eilat, for a launch from the north. Also, the Iraqis announced that claimed responsibility for, if I'm not mistaken, the 6th or 7th launch at Israel in the span of 2 weeks. And this doesn't get the same headlines that Israel's war with Hamas in Gaza or with Hezbollah in Lebanon, but Israel's in a multi-front war. Everyone's warning of a regional war. Israel is in a regional war.
All right, and certainly the risks of that escalating are growing every day. Doron Avital, Ariel Osseron, stay with us. We're going out for a brief break. We'll have lots more.
sale for the benefit of the victims of October 7, 2023, supported by the Karen Hayazad, with renowned artists from all over the world on Monday, October 7, 2024. View the complete catalog and access remote purchase orders on aspacefineart.com and Karen-Hayazad.fr.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back to the Rundown on I-24 News. We just have breaking news right at this moment. As we said earlier, sirens rang out in Eilat. Reports of a suspicious aerial object entering the area of Eilat. You could see an explosion there. We are seeing some footage. This is all unconfirmed by the IDF, but we're seeing some footage of it striking. Looks like Doron maybe in the port area, maybe
it's
hit
the port area.
Maybe hit a building there. We don't know. That's unconfirmed, but that's some of the video footage that's coming out.
Houthis are playing their hands again.
Right. Could be the Houthis or it could be the Iraqi Shiites. So we'll follow that up, see who get more information about that. And of course, Iran behind both of those parties, behind this attack. Now, we mentioned it earlier, as Iran's supposedly moderate president made his first appearance on the world stage at the UN General Assembly, calling for improved relations with the West. The country's behind-the-scenes actions have proven otherwise, with more assassination plots and destabilizing activities uncovered in recent days and actions by its proxies as well. Alex Schloss takes a closer look.
Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian has made his United Nations debut with a speech calling for dialogue with the West, showing his moderate face to the world. But behind the scenes, where the real power lies in Tehran, tells another story. Former U.S. President Donald Trump was briefed by U.S. intelligence officials on credible Iranian threats to assassinate him, according to his campaign team.
Big threats on my life by Iran. The entire U.S. military is watching and waiting. Moves were already made by Iran that didn't work out, but they will try again. Not a good situation for anyone. I am surrounded by more men, guns, and weapons than I have ever seen before. Thank you to Congress for unanimously approving far more money to Secret Service. 0 no votes, strictly bipartisan. Nice to see Republicans and Democrats get together on something. An attack on a former president is a death wish for the attacker.
It wouldn't be the first such plot exposed in recent times. Just 6 weeks ago, the U.S. Justice Department charged a Pakistani national in an Iranian plot to kill a U.S. government official, potentially in response to the Trump administration's 2020 assassination of IRGC General Qasem Soleimani. The U.S. is not the only Western country to face Iranian threats. On Tuesday, Swedish authorities accused Iran of hacking into a text messaging service last year, urging Swedes to take revenge following a string of Quran-burning demonstrations.
The fact that a state actor, in this case Iran, is behind an action aimed at destabilizing Sweden or increasing polarization in our country is, of course, very serious.
Iran has denied the allegation. So as Iran's president presents a softer image of the Islamic Republic to the world, the covert actions of Tehran say otherwise.
Well, that's the moderate Iran, face of Iran. Of course, we've seen one of its regional proxies apparently take a strike at the port city of Eilat this evening. What are we getting some information there, it looks like?
Yeah, so according to various Arab media, the pro-Iranian militias in Iraq have claimed responsibility for launching drones at the port of Eilat. We saw one interception. It is possible that one did make it through, hitting the port. Now, it is surprising that it's not the Houthis because they have an open tab, because we struck the port of Hodeidah and they like their equations, a port for a port. But because they're all part of the same organization, which is the proxy capabilities of Iran. If you don't use the Houthis, they have another arm in the pro-Iranian militias in Iraq. This would be their second or even third drone attack today on Israel. And if indeed one of them or more did make it through Israel's air defenses in the south, it would be the third or fourth time that has happened in the south, and that is something that does raise some concern. But at the end of the day, Israel's targeted from 6-7 different territories, right, some thousands of kilometers away. It is intercepting the vast majority of it, but there's no such thing as perfect when you have a multi-layered air defense.
Okay, I want to stress, nothing has been confirmed by the IDF. We are speaking now, we are referring to foreign sources in Arab media, so we don't, I don't want to, this is based on reports on foreign media. I do want to make that stress that. Well, again, Iran is the hand behind all of this. Let's go to Behnam Ben Teleblu, Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, is joining us from Washington, D.C. Behnam, actually, we're talking a lot about Iran just now and possible action from their proxies. Should we expect Iran to start activating those proxies in the next, or even now and in the coming days, into trying to, if you want to say it, strike at Israel while Israel's striking Hezbollah?
Well, it's a great question, and great to be with you, Kalev. Listen, this is the Islamic Republic basically functioning as a chef in a very large kitchen, moving different pots and pans off different types of burners, some that are on high, some that are on very low. And what the Islamic Republic has been trying to do since it achieved its political success with that brutal act of terrorism on October 7th is to begin to use all the other proxies. Hezbollah starting on October 8th, the Shia militias in Iraq and Syria starting on October 17th, and then the Houthis actually starting on October 19th to threaten a wider war to be able to bail out Hamas, the lowest of the low in its axis of resistance on the cheap. And that is still the overwhelming logic here. But again, this axis, this network is responsive to external stimuli with major Israeli military successes, both covert and overt, against Lebanese Hezbollah in the north as the Israeli government tries to act on its stated aim of moving back those 60,000 internally displaced persons. Iran is again reshuffling the deck, trying to find new and innovative ways to use these proxies to still on the cheap try to find some kind of soft underbelly.
Right, so that's one face of Iran, you might say, Behnam. Let's talk about the other face, the performance, and I deliberately choose that word, of President Pezeshkian there at the United Nations General Assembly.
I'm glad you used that word. I use an analogy. This is akin to putting lipstick on a pig, and I think that's being polite because you've seen the Islamic Republic oscillate in terms of the presidents it elects, or more aptly selects, and then sends to the United Nations General Assembly every September. And in this sense, this is akin to a change in style, not substance. This is someone who is still quite keen on building bridges with America's great power competitors like Russia and China. This is someone who continues to talk about Western university students not being anti-Semites while running full cover for all sorts of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and anti-Israeli activity that his government promotes, without ever mentioning once the brave role of Iranian protesters and Iranian university students protesting their own regime at home for decades now. So this is someone who is, again, trying to buy time for the regime's nuclear, missile, and military programs, trying to paint a different face just to get a change in substance from the West, while only offering a change in style from him and from his regime.
Right. Yes, okay. All right, well, Benon Ben-Telebro, as you say, putting lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. Benon Ben-Telebro, Foundation for the Defense of Democracy, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, conflicting reports this evening whether Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is going off to the UN General Assembly or not. One report, he's already delayed that trip. There's a report this evening, unconfirmed, that he may cancel and let the Foreign Minister Israel Katz go instead. In the meantime, it's clearly the international community there at the UN is focused on the Israeli offensive against Hezbollah. Fabio Shapiro has more on that in this report.
As Israel's war against Hamas nears its first anniversary and the situation heats up on Israel's northern border, the United Nations is convening once again for the annual General Assembly meeting. Following the Israeli strikes that killed many Hezbollah senior officers, calls for de-escalation echoed in the hall.
These strikes conducted on both sides of the Blue Line, and in the region more broadly, must end. France once again calls on the parties and those that support them to de-escalate and avoid a regional conflict that would be devastating for everyone, first and foremost, the civilian population.
Escalation is extremely dangerous and worrying. I can say that we are almost in a full-fledged war.
Gaza is a non-stop nightmare that threatens to take the entire region with it. Look no further than Lebanon. We should all be alarmed by the escalation. Lebanon is at the brink. The people of Lebanon, the people of Israel, and the people of the world cannot afford Lebanon to become another Gaza.
Understanding the situation they are in internally, Lebanon refrained from naming Hezbollah, which is dominant in the country, and focused on the issues faced by Lebanese society.
Prime Minister Najib Mikati is working with the government and government teams to deal with the aggression that we are victim to at all levels: diplomatic, humanitarian, health, security, and also in terms of people's livelihoods.
On the sidelines, Lebanese Foreign Minister Abdallah Abul Habib met his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi. Since last year, China has become an important diplomatic player in the Middle East, a position Beijing intends to expand as the Western grip loosens. Yet, U.S. President Joe Biden was hopeful his work in the region would be fruitful.
Hezbollah, unprovoked, joined the October 7th attack, launching rockets into Israel. Almost a year later, too many on each side of the Israeli-Lebanon border remain displaced. A full-scale war is not in anyone's interest. Even if the situation has escalated, a diplomatic solution is still possible. In fact, it remains the only path to lasting security to allow the residents from both countries to return to their homes and the border safely. And that's what we're working tirelessly to achieve.
Long-range.
Outside the hall, Israel ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, digressed about a possible ground invasion.
We had experience in Lebanon in the past. We are not eager to start any ground invasion anywhere. I don't want to send my son, and we don't want to send our boys to fight in a foreign country. But we are determined to protect the civilians of Israel. We prefer a diplomatic solution. If it's not working, we are using other methods to show to the other side that we mean business.
All right. Again, we are following that story of a possible strike at the Eilat port. Again, we see pictures there, smoke rising from there. Magen David Adom, the Emergency Rescue Health Service, did put out a statement that they're treating a 68-year-old man for light injuries
as a result of glass shrapnel.
As a result of shrapnel, yes. But we are seeing some photos of some damage there. As you said, reports in Arab media that this was the work of the Iranian-linked militias in Iraq, but of course it could be the Houthis as well.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if at the end of the day we realize that this was done by the Houthis. The Iraqis also have the capabilities to pull it off, but what does emerge right now, and still there's no official statement yet coming out, neither from the IDF nor the police, that while we did see an interception in the air, we are seeing now impact, smoke from impact in what appears to be the area of the port. Now, Arab media is saying that the impact was on the military dock of the port. Obviously, they tried to show that all the targets that that Iran's proxies target are indeed military targets. If they succeeded, that's pretty impressive on their part.
There is a naval base there.
Yeah, but it looks like the civilian. My feeling is the civilian port that was hit. But yes, of course, there's a naval base there, where our Navy operates in the Red Sea. It's a key, it's a key naval base for us, of course.
All right, we'll get you, we're still waiting for official IDF or police confirmation of all of that development in Eilat. In the meantime, though, let's go to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim at the United Nations. And Mike, some conflicting reports this evening. One of the local Hebrew papers here, Ma'ariv, reporting, saying Prime Minister Netanyahu has not coming to the UN. In the end, he's going to send the foreign minister, Israel Katz, though we don't have official confirmation of it yet. Of course, certainly Israel, given what you're seeing at the UN in the last couple of days, it sounds like critically important for Israel to have some strong representation there, either tomorrow or Friday.
Yeah, in some sense it does, just because of the global situation right now, the regional focus on the Middle East, and it certainly helps to have somebody of note come here and essentially make the case for Israel. On the other hand, what does making the case for Israel really do at the United Nations? Not a whole lot of anything, unfortunately, because there are so many opposed to it, just on a level of principle, it seems, here in New York. So, yes, on one hand, important. On the other hand, does it really make a difference in the grand scheme of things? I'm not so sure. The latest update we heard is that everybody's kind of on standby right now, that the Prime Minister could head to the airport.
Mike, I have to interrupt you. The IDF spokesperson is starting.
Good evening. In the last few minutes, sirens were heard in Eilat when 2 drones entered the airspace. The Israeli Navy intercepted one of them, and one was impacted Eilat port. 2 have been lightly injured in the area. We have continued to attack from the air in Lebanon throughout the day. Hundreds of targets throughout Lebanon have been hit in order to impact the abilities of Hezbollah. We have hit more than 2,000 terror targets, among them the launchers who launched missiles towards northern Israel. In today's strikes, we also attacked the intelligence headquarters of Hezbollah. We attacked 70 different sites, and we are thereby making it harder for Hezbollah to have an intelligence snapshot. We have proven in recent days what we have said for many years. Hezbollah is taking advantage of the Lebanese civilians for terrorism. From the documentation we have, we see warfare quite clearly. We see weapons being placed in homes after we have attacked them. We see in this house, in the village of Meifadoun, we see a missile launcher that Israel has attacked, and both house and launcher have been demolished. Another example is in the village of Berashit. We see a missile launcher in a house. So the Hezbollah terrorists are putting these missile launches in civilians' homes in order to launch missiles tens or hundreds of kilometers away in order to hurt Israeli civilians. We continue to target them. We do not stop. At the same time, we're also preparing for the future. Today, we have called to reserve duty 2 divisions. Hezbollah has actually fired an SSM, a surface-to-surface missile, heading for Tel Aviv. We therefore attacked the launcher and building from which they launched the missile. Many sirens were used in order to prevent any person being hit by the interception. And we will update Israeli civilians because this Israeli civilians' safety, that is the most important priority. Please listen to the directions and instructions of the Home Front Command. 12 News. Are reservists going to be called up in preparation for a ground operation in Lebanon? And now that the missiles have reached Tel Aviv, what about mass events such as soccer matches and concerts? As I've said, we are constantly making a report assessments to see. We have just heard about the event in Eilat. We continue to assess and we will update. We look at the entire snapshot, entire situation in Israel, and the only instructions we think of, or the only reason we change the instructions is for Israeli citizens' safety. We may have some specific directions when it comes to any mass events. We will update the public if need be. As for reservists, I have just said that 2 reserve divisions have been called to duty. The Chief of General Staff has also visited the 7th Division. We are preparing for anything required in order to make sure that the northern Israeli citizens can go back to their homes. Kan 11, the drone that has been launched from Iraq, has hit Eilat, is now the idea of preparing to attack Iraq. And why are we still looking at infrastructure in Lebanon? Why do we still care about the infrastructure? Well, we have intercepted a drone in the last 60 minutes, and the second one has hit the port of Eilat. I spoke about that earlier. We have 2 lightly injured people there. When we intercept, we always look at what can place civilians in danger and what doesn't. We will investigate this event and we will update you on that. We continue with aerial defense. Aerial defense happens with the Israeli air defense, Israeli naval defense. We do it around the clock, and it sometimes happens, sometimes drones do hit. It happens in the north, it happens in Eilat, and it's very important to listen to the directives. And as we've seen, we have 2 lightly injured people in the port. We continue to monitor the threat from Iraq. It's part of our assessment. We collect and gather intelligence, and we'll do anything we need in order to address it. Ynet and Yediot Achronot. Yesterday didn't answer my question, so I'm going to repeat it now. Following the situation, has the IDF now defined the north as a main arena and the south as a secondary arena? So let me answer this question about the north being the primary or the secondary target, and also about infrastructure being hit in Lebanon. The IDF, first of all, targets Hezbollah, a terror organization. We have a plan in place to target Hezbollah. We want to remove the threats posed by Hezbollah, and to do that, we are focused on that. We are focused on this around the clock. Right now, we place greater emphasis on the Israeli Air Force, the intelligence, the Northern Command. We're doing this around the clock and we'll continue to do that. Anything else is just due to considerations that all is focused on bringing the northern residents back. As for the infrastructure, we are focused in recent days on the north. It looks like it's the main arena, but don't think that we're not taking any action in Gaza. I'm just going at and I'm talking about the things that are at the center, but today we have also killed Hamas terrorists in Gaza. We still have divisions active there. We are working around the clock. We're doing everything in our power to dismantle Hamas, to gather intelligence, and to do everything in our power when it comes to the hostages on both the operative and intelligence level, including trying to bring them back. This is something that we are making great efforts in. Eran Weinstein, Surgim, 2 questions.
All right, there was the IDF spokesperson, Daniel Hagari, confirming the attack on the port of Eilat. 2 lightly injured. 1 drone was intercepted. 1 did hit the port area. Ariel, what are we getting for updates on this?
Yeah, so as he mentioned, 2 injured. Now, we don't yet have an official claim of responsibility, but we do have an interesting statement coming out from the spokesperson of perhaps the strongest of Iran's proxies in Iraq, Kataib Hezbollah, the spokesperson Abu Ali al-Askari, calling on the different Islamic resistance in Iraq to increase attacks on Israel, in a statement on his Telegram channel saying that the enemy's military and security will suffer more painful blows as the war moves on. Now, in the IDF statement, mentioned that these 2 drones came from the east, as all of the drones coming from Iraq. That would mean that they fly over Jordanian airspace and perhaps also via Saudi airspace. Now, we have seen them in the past, and mainly in the April Iranian missile and drone strike, down many of those hostile projectiles over their airspace. Now they're not doing that, and their airspace is being violated as well. Their sovereignty is being violated as well, and they're allowing this to happen. So much for the plans of a regional air defense cooperation. What we see right now are multiple countries being violated by Iran's aggression across the region.
Well, that raises the question, Doron, which Daniel Hagari did not answer. Will Israel strike back at these Iranian-linked militias in Iraq? Can Israel strike back at them?
It can. The question whether you have a target, you have a definite. It's not like the Houthis that are very well located. It would be harder for us. We have to also manage the presence of other forces in this area. But of course, it's within the ability of the IDF to do it. There's no question. The Air Force can do it in many different ways. The question whether you have a clear target, the same way we have with the Hezbollah target or with the Houthis. What basically he says to us is that while we shift our attention to the north, we shouldn't lose sight.
I mean, this is a serious incident. The drone did manage to penetrate and hit a sensitive area.
Yeah, exactly, of course. There's no question about it. I mean, and this is the south. Our attention is in the north. We seem to be forgetting Gaza. He was insisting that also in Gaza we operate in the magnitude of a division that operates and killed a few Hamas terrorists only today. So the attention has to be shifted in all those directions, no question about that. We are attacked from on many fronts. We have a very good aerial defense mechanism. It's not airtight, everybody understands it. But we have to keep to be very careful and continue the mission in the north.
All right, 30 seconds.
Yeah, no, just speaking of shifting focus, we barely talked about the hostages. 101 still in Gaza, and this is part of the intention by Hezbollah to try and drag the focus to them. And so long as that continues to delay a deal in Gaza.
Okay, and one final note, source in the Prime Minister's office putting out this statement. Prime Minister Netanyahu and Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer's red line is to kick Hezbollah across the Litani River. There are currently no negotiations. Of course, we mentioned earlier reports that the U.S. is trying to negotiate a ceasefire in the north and in the south as well. That ends this edition of The Rundown on I-24 News. Thank you for joining us. You continue to follow us there on our website.